On the day to celebrate the Buddha's enlightenment, the Lingkhor is especially crowded. Many people are begging for alms. The giving of money, food or tea was very much part of the pilgrims' practice, and it still is today. These days in Macleodganj, the beggars are Indians and the pilgrims giving money are Tibetan refugees. On festival days, the cabinet and senior civil officials also walked the Lingkhor, but they would get very hot in their heavy ceremonial costumes and so would stop off the British mission for a cup of tea. Historically, the British and Chinese were officially represented in Tibet. British pressure to allow trading had led to the establishment of a new British trade mission in 1937, and in the mid-1940s, a Chinese representative arrived in Lhasa. Relations with the British were cordial, while they were more tense with the Chinese. Dr. Sun Lien Shen, seen here being welcomed by Jigme Tering, the Tibetan finance minister, was a representative of the Chinese nationalist government. At home, China was in the midst of a bloody civil war between the nationalists and the communists. Life in Lhasa continued according to ancient custom and practice. The Dalai Lama lived in the Potala during the winter and the Norba Linka during the summer. Twice a year, the civil and religious hierarchy accompanied him on his move from palace to palace. Identified by the peacock-feathered umbrella, which accompanied his sedan chair or palanquin, the whole population of Lhasa watched silently for a glimpse of His Holiness.
At the
front of the procession, there would be the lower rank officials, and they would get higher and higher the nearer they got to His Holiness's palanquin. The front column are the monk civil servants in order of importance, up to the cabinet ministers who ride alongside His Holiness. Behind the palanquin are his two personal tutors, and then his immediate family members. The lay civil officials bring up the rear at the end of the procession according to one's rank and position. It was the same protocol as when you would have an official audience with His Holiness. As a junior civil servant, my turn would come somewhere at the very end.
I went to see the Dalai Lama many times. We would stand on both sides of the route. Because he traveled in a palanquin, you only be able to get an occasional glance of him.
We used to also stand in line with the crowd and view and get a blessing from His Holiness while he was in the palanquin, because everything was so silent, incense burning, and people very quiet and trying hard to get a glimpse of him. And at the end, they would have the army band coming, which was more fun. I mean, sort of a lot of excitement then.
Oh, that young monk, I think out of curiosity, looking. In any case, from my childhood, from that age, I always smile with people, with public. So people also, you see, love my smile. So whenever I look like that, the people express some kind of expression of overjoys. I think around 10 years old, around 10, when I look this, I feel the people consider or the reincarnation of High Lama, but actually that young boy, I think only play how to play. So there is big contrast.
These days, there isn't quite the same spectacle when the Dalai Lama travels. Although lots of devotees turn out to see him, his bodyguards are now armed with walkie-talkies, and he travels in a modest, though bulletproof car. Tibetan Buddhists have retained much of their culture and religious practice since going into exile. But life in Tibet before the Chinese occupation was significantly different in many ways. The Tibetan year is marked by many religious festivals. Here, at the Dalai Lama's own Namgyal monastery, thousands of people gather to celebrate New Year. This takes place in late February, early March. But sadly, far fewer festivals are celebrated now than they were in Tibet. The King's New Year festival celebrates the Dalai Lama's position as the ruler of both church and state. The high officials wear robes whose design dates back to the 7th century, along with ancient ornaments of amber and coral, which had been traded along the Silk Route and had originally come from the Mediterranean. The turquoise charm boxes around their necks and the golden bar encased in turquoise, which reaches their waist, is so heavy it must be carried. The ordinary people of Lhasa gather at the foot of the potala to watch the sky dancing, a spectacle which a man scales a rope up to a tall wooden mast, stands precariously on a small platform, and then spins himself around. The performer is traditionally a man from one of the small villages in the region of Sang. It's done in retribution for their resistance to the rule of the 5th Dalai Lama. There's a saying in Sang, mothers don't die from illnesses, but from worry that their sons might be taken for the sky dance. The casting out of the votive offering was one of the biggest and most elaborate of the celebrations. This ceremonial military maneuver was known as the coiling snake. With civil officials acting as marshals, 500 infantry in chain mail move in a zigzag formation, while another formation circles it. Seemingly chaotic, it was highly organized, and the troops rehearsed for months to perfect it. Hundreds of monks arrive, carrying green drums and cymbals. Next, the torma are brought out, tall sculptures which have a grinning skull on top and represent all evil spirits. Wearing an ornate headdress, the Nechung oracle, a monk who is chosen for his psychic powers, appears in a state of possession. The oracle's helmet and costume are so heavy that the medium can hardly walk in them when he's not in a trance-like state. He races around chaotically, chasing the tormas into a clearing, accompanied by hundreds of monks and most of the population of Lhasa. When the oracle arrives, he shoots a burning arrow into bonfires which contain the evil spirits, and they're set ablaze. Many of the religious festivals had an additional civil or governmental element. At the review at Trapchi, the Tibetan cavalry assembled in front of the cabinet and government officials. The cavalry wears chainmail, steel breastplates, and helmets with peacock feathers on them. The standard bearers wear special helmets which have Allah inscribed on them in gold, thought to date back to 8th century contact with Arabs. They carry tall lances wrapped in painted banners, said to have been given by the army of Genghis Khan's grandson. The cabinet wears ornate robes. Their fur-trimmed hats have silk crowns with ornaments on top of coral, turquoise and gold. A government official, followed by 4 junior officials, makes his report to the cabinet, announcing the number of men and horses. Shio Daji had to attend the review every year.
These official functions tended to be rather long, drawn-out affairs. However, each one of us had our own responsibilities to perform. As you can see here in the film, when we junior accountants had to present the inspection report at the review at Trapchi, we had to give the full list of horsemen and their equipment. So I had felt very tense from early in the morning as I had to present the report aloud in front of a huge gathering of people. I would worry that I would make mistakes and embarrass myself, so I felt scared. I would be so terrified that time would just fly past. But when I had no responsibilities, the ceremony would get tedious and seem to go on forever. So we young ones would quietly sneak out the back for a cigarette and a chat.
Another military event, the gallop round the fort, was slightly more exciting to attend.
These are the special Molam Festival cavalry. 2 Yaso generals command them. Together they are being prepared to lead the presentation. There were 3 targets. The riders had to ride past, fire a gun, shoot an arrow, and spare each one. If they managed to hit each of the targets, they would be presented with a victory scarf.
The targets are hung perilously close to the spectators' heads. There is frighteningly little crowd control, and serious accidents result. Finally, the competitors line up to receive their prayer scarves. The event ends when they perform a special Mongolian salute. Other pursuits were more gentle. The people of Lhasa, rich and poor alike, took advantage of the summer festivals to enjoy their environment. During the month of celebrations to honour the Buddha's enlightenment, the government ministers and officials are rowed around a lake to make offerings. After they'd had their turn, the ordinary pilgrims were allowed to go. It's hard to believe that war was raging in the rest of the world as the people of Lhasa set off for their annual picnic season.
South of Lhasa, there were many parks. During the first 2 weeks in May, it was picnic season. The quality of the tent depended on how rich you were. Poor people would just rig up a sheet or a small tent, but everyone went. People might picnic for 1 day or for longer, but on the 15th, everybody would go to their local place of worship and then come to the picnic.
The nationalist Kuomintang government in China maintained its mission in Lhasa and even joined in with the Tibetan festivals. However, at home, the communists were growing in power and a civil war was raging.
You see the flag there? It's the flag of the Chinese Kuomintang. In those days, the Chinese in Tibet were mainly the official representatives of the Kuomintang. The present Chinese hadn't arrived yet. Here you can see some people performing the incense burning ceremony. And here are some monks playing the long horns and the oboes. This is a group of Nangma musicians. They had their own musical association. I know one of them, the man wearing dark glasses. He's called Namgyal. He was a very well-known musician in Lhasa. He was a brilliant harmonica player. He also played the Tibetan lute and other instruments. He was blind, and that's why he wore dark glasses. Everyone knew him by his nickname, Namgyal, no eyes.
Another important summer event, and one of the Dalai Lama's favourites, was the annual opera festival held at the Norbalinka Palace.
During summer in Nobulinga, I think around July, August, on summer festival, the folk dance and also every day the military performance. So like another child, I love the military the performance. They well organized, they are quite smart, like that. Opera, Tibetan unique opera is a play. So during that period, I have no lesson, free, holiday. Then my mother often come because during that period, my family stay in residence in Nopulinga. They stay there a few days. So I'm very happy. Then after 5 days, festival finish. The next day, my lesson started. And same time, the 5th day evening, my mother depart. So I feel very, very sad. That's the child's sort of experience, like that.
For the commoners in Lhasa, participation in some festival events was not really a matter of choice. For the wrestling and weightlifting, the contestants were all from the Dalai Lama's personal bodyguard regiment. Though it's hard to believe, given their size and stature. The wrestling was a particularly unpopular duty, as they had to wear loincloths. It was deemed to be shameful appearing semi-naked in public, and especially in front of your superiors. For most, shyness meant they were covered up quickly, but some seemed to rather enjoy it. At the same time as a horse race is being conducted around the city, there's also a foot race. A motley group of men running brightly coloured outfits, somewhat unenthusiastically. The race is compulsory and is performed as a duty to their landlords. For the Tibetan aristocrats, there were lots of social events to attend at the British Mission, or Deki Linka. In true colonial style, tea was served and even darts were played.
Summer was a period where everybody had a party to celebrate the summer and to be outdoors. This person playing the dart is my grandmother's youngest, one of the younger sisters, Delarapten, playing darts, yes. Now this looks like a party at the British legation or the British mission, Dikilinga, because it's a beautiful garden, and then the servant at the back, he's wearing the special costumes which the servants in the Sikkim royal family used to wear. So I think very much they wore this costume at the formal parties. And this looks very much like the senior, yes, it's the senior Mrs. Lalu. She was a very special lady. She was actually a nun, and she fell in love with a member of the 13th Dalai Lama's family. And anyhow, she was very kind, and she did everything in such a grand scale. And she used to visit once a year at our home.
The British mission closed when India gained independence in 1947. Tibet still had no status as an independent nation and was not recognized internationally. The civil war between the communists and nationalists in China continued. The Tibetan government realized that if the communists won, they would not tolerate their religion. However, they didn't want to be seen to be taking sides, so they politely asked the nationalist Chinese to leave Tibet. They were sent off with the utmost courtesy, with parties and free transport to the Indian border. The small Tibetan army was reorganized, new regiments were formed, and they were re-equipped. In 1949, the Chinese Civil War ended, and the People's Republic of China was established under Mao Zedong's chairmanship. One of their first objectives was to bring Tibet back into what they called the motherland. On the 6th of October 1950, 40,000 Chinese soldiers of the People's Liberation Army invaded Tibet, and the small Tibetan army was quickly overwhelmed and forced to surrender. The issue of the invasion was raised with the United Nations, but nothing was done. Indeed, the international community did shamefully little to help Tibet in its plight. So, the Tibetans had nothing to do but to negotiate with the Chinese. To do this, they needed a sole ruler. And so Dalai Lama, still with 2 years of training ahead of him, was rapidly giving the power to rule in Tibet. Incredible this, a 16-year-old boy was suddenly made the temporal and spiritual ruler of Tibet. The teenager acted quickly and sent delegations to Britain and America, but it was the height of the Cold War, and they refused to help. The Chinese, however, were happy to talk. Fearful that Chinese troops would invade Lhasa, the Dalai Lama instructed Tibetan officials in Beijing to begin negotiations. The 17-point agreement, in which Tibet was defined as being part of the Chinese motherland, was signed in Beijing without the Dalai Lama's consent. The reunification, as the Chinese called it, was completed when the invading forces reached Lhasa in October 1951, and Tibet was conquered. Samdong Rinpoche was in Lhasa at the time.
At that time, there are quite a sizable number of Chinese military personnel arrived in Tibet, and they have set up loudspeaker radio in Lhasa town. So there was a lot of wires going over the houses, and there's a big loudspeaker. So it was not a radio, but just propaganda through a whole the town covered by the loudspeakers.
After the Chinese arrived in 1951, everybody felt that they had lost their way. They didn't know what to do. There was a real feeling of tension and uneasiness in Lhasa. The Chinese were becoming more and more oppressive by the day. His Holiness was in a very difficult position in the face of the military power of the Chinese.
Rather than resist Chinese rule, the Dalai Lama attempted to make the 17-point agreement work. As it was meant to allow the Tibetan government to continue running its own country, for the next 3 years he set about introducing social and land reforms, attempting to propel Tibet into the 20th century. However, he still had ancient and highly demanding spiritual duties to perform. The Kalachakra ceremony, or Wheel of Time, is one of the most complex systems of theory and practice in Tibetan Buddhism. The 17-year-old Dalai Lama was initiated into this tantric tradition in front of hundreds of officials and monks at the Norbalinka Palace.
I think this is the first time of Kala Chakra initiation at Norbalinka. I think 16, 17. I already, took the responsibility of the Kasa, the temporal power.
Oh, bless me. Here comes His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Here he is receiving mandala offering for long life. He's looking so young. He's not wearing glasses yet. He must be 16 or 17. Here is the Lord Abbot, elder brother of His Holiness, Losang Samte. It must be inside the Norbalinka. This is during the Kala Chakra teachings. It looks like the people are throwing scarves forward to request the teachings of the mandala ceremony. You would say prayers, then everyone would throw scarves forward. It was what everyone did in Tibet, but these days His Holiness discourages it.
In 1954, the Dalai Lama received an invitation from the Chinese to go to Beijing. Most Tibetans were against the idea, fearing for his safety. The Dalai Lama, however, was determined to go, seeing it as an opportunity to be able to talk to Chairman Mao in person.
Then I felt, not only me, but some officials, some high officials, now two opinions. One opinion, Now this is right time. Should go to Peking and meet high officials, high leaders. Then some very much reluctant, very much against. I think out of fear. And my own opinion is, now better go there.
Eventually, it was decided he could go, provided he returned within 1 year. His Holiness himself promised the people he would return within the year.
I heard that when he was about to cross the Tsangpo River, people had come from Lhasa in their finest clothes. In Tibet, it is a custom for women to dress up for special journeys for good luck. They all crowded along the river bank, looking very anxious. Some were even about to throw themselves into the river in sorrow and desperation.
Now this is actually, you see, departing Lhasa to China. I think this one. You know, I like missions or these modern things. So I love to see, to visit China. But at the same time, not like just tourists, also have some responsibility. So not very certain. So all kinds of mixture feeling. Some hopes, some doubts, some fears, some, undecisive, like that. And also some excitement.
The Dalai Lama attended the first National Chinese People's Congress, which included 10 seats for the Tibetan delegation. He was impressed by Mao and felt a great affinity with many of the egalitarian principles of communism. However, at their last meeting, Mao wasted no time in giving his true opinion of Tibet and its future under Chinese rule. As the Dalai Lama left, Mao turned to him and said, "Religion is poison." The Dalai Lama returned home. News reached him that the Chinese authorities in eastern Tibet were confiscating lands belonging to monasteries and redistributing them amongst themselves. The situation deteriorated. Fighting broke out between the Chinese army and Tibetan freedom fighters, and refugees began pouring into Lhasa. In the midst of this tense atmosphere, the Dalai Lama still had to take his final monastic exams, the main focus of which were public debates. Debate is a rigorous discussion of Buddha's teachings. Everything is challenged. Debate is an ancient tradition within Buddhism, which is still practiced today, although the monks, and now nuns, are somewhat more vigorous in their style than they were in the 1950s. These monks are arguing over their personal interpretation of Buddhist texts. The skill is in arguing and using logic and your own analysis to back up your points. They are punctuated with claps to the hand. The respondent must then reply. The culmination of the Dalai Lama's 18 years of study was an examination for a doctorate in Buddhist philosophy. It started with debates at 3 of the largest monasteries in Tibet. Drepung Monastery had 10,000 resident monks. 8,000 of them were squeezed into the square to see the Dalai Lama as he arrived with his retinue to take his first exam. The monastery owned local estates and had some 20,000 tied peasants who worked the land and paid them taxes. The revenue paid for the prayer sessions and festivals which dominated monastic life. Feeding the monks for big events, like the examinations, was a huge, if somewhat rushed, process. The young monks run down from the cookhouse carrying huge tubs of sampa for their brethren who are sitting in the square. Sampa is roasted barley flour mixed with yak butter, tea or water to make dough. To celebrate His Holiness's presence, the monks are also given prayer scarves, tea and money.
I'm somewhere here, somewhere among these, the second row or third row I should be. And this is a Goman side. These are the government officials. Now His Holiness is offering the debate to the two abbots. During his early life, he had to go to China and he had to go to India, and he had so many things to attend. So then he did not have time to study.
Oh, now this abbot, top scholar, Mongolian, and also he asked question very rapidly. Said. So a bit more nervous. So I had little opportunity to think how to trick to him. One top scholar, you see, very rapidly, you see, putting question, then no time, you see, how to pretend or how to defend like that. So now this is my turn, debate.
Of course, we have received a lot of teaching from His Holiness, and we know he is a very great scholar. But he was not joined in the monastic debate. We thought he may not be very sharp in the in the debate. But for the first time, we saw when he was examined by the abbots, he was brilliant and absolutely sharp, equal with those who are debating the monastery for lifetime. And the abbots find it quite difficult to debate with him.
The next exam was at Sera Monastery. The whole of the Dalai Lama's government travelled with him, allowing him to consult with them about the growing tension in Lhasa. At the same time, he had to prepare for the next series of debates. But the abbots each had their own individual style of arguing.
In Sera Monastery, you see, when you debate with the opponent, good scholar, then their answer is something logical or something, you see, they valid, meaningful. In Sera Monastery, one abbot, not that much scholar, not that top. So you see, from my side, you see, the preparation, if answer come this way, yes, this is the way to argue. If this way, if answer has come this kind of answer, then yes, already prepared. And here's the answer, unexpected answer. So then my tutor noticed that, then he very kindly, stop, now finish. Okay. That's tremendous relief.
The last of preliminary exams was some distance from Lhasa, at Ganden Monastery. Ironically, the examinations at Ganden proved to be a brief period of respite for Dalai Lama. Thousands more refugees had fled the fighting in the east and arrived in Lhasa. A huge number are now camped around the outskirts of the city. Tensions with the occupying Chinese, who'd been in Tibet for about 9 years, were high. There were food shortages in Lhasa and rumours about massacres in eastern Tibet, and also rumours about the destruction of sacred sites. Meanwhile, the Dalai Lama still had his final exam to take. The Dalai Lama returned to Lhasa and continued to prepare for his final exam. Amidst increasingly disturbing reports of Chinese atrocities, he attempted to concentrate on his studies. He took solace in Buddha's teachings that one's enemy is one's greatest teacher and to have compassion for all sentient beings. The final exam was arranged to take place at the same time as the Mulam New Year festival. There were 30,000 monks in the city, and pilgrims were arriving from all over Tibet. The Jokang temple was full to bursting. The cabinet, civil officials, and all the senior abbots and monks were present.
At that time, things were very tense. On the one hand, a very solemn and grand ceremony was taking place. On the other hand, we were in a very dangerous and tense situation.
There are a lot of rumors about danger to his security, and the threat perception was very high. And therefore, it was very tight security arrangements used to be there, and that was a bit annoying. And that was not a consonance with the monastic atmosphere. So a lot of soldiers with guns and very attentive and with walkie-talkies. These are not familiar with the people. So that was a tense and also the joyful. These are going together.
Gun emplacements were built. There were Chinese carrying rifles patrolling the rooftops opposite. Everyone, government officials, the clergy, the people, were there for the religious function of the 13th, but they saw clearly the Chinese soldiers walking around on the rooftops.
I was involved in organizing the event. In this emergency situation, there was nothing we could do. We asked some of the monk officials to disguise themselves as ordinary people and mingle with the public and to act like spies.
On the one hand, the ordinary people and the aristocrats were all dressed up in their finest. On the other, right next door, the Chinese were making elaborate military preparations, with soldiers carrying rifles as if they might attack at any moment. It was unbelievable that these two extraordinary situations could be happening at the same time. The position between the Chinese and the Tibetans was becoming irreconcilable. It was an incredible situation that was unfolding. If you had told an outsider, they wouldn't believe you. But that's how it was.
One aspect, the whole atmosphere is so tense. Many people actually felt whether this big gathering can take place or not because of so much tense. But then everything go very smoothly. So everybody very happy. My final examination, successful. I think very successful. And also